Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Gaulin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast episode. Today, we are talking about a very interesting topic, Auto-Brewery Syndrome, which is when the gut somehow produces alcohol and people have actually been pulled over for intoxication. This is so wild, but it's actually a very serious and very interesting syndrome. And we are joined today by the amazing Barbara Cordell. She is not only a nurse, but she holds a PhD in counseling, and she works with patients that have this Auto-Brewery Syndrome. And she's also the president of Auto-Brewery Syndrome Information and Research. And if that's not enough, she's also the author of this amazing book, My Gut Makes Alcohol. How crazy is this? But this is a very serious situation, and it's all about the science and stories of Auto-Brewery Syndrome. And she's going to give us information of patients that actually have this and what's happened to them. So welcome, Barbara. So nice to see you today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So first of all, got to ask you, Auto-Brewery Syndrome, what is going on, and how is alcohol produced in the gut without even taking a sip of alcohol?
Well, you said it. It is crazy and interesting. It's a syndrome where people get a gut dysbiosis. So a lot of people know about that. Your gut's out of order and you've got some microbiome things going on there. And what happens in Auto-Brewery is that either a yeast or a bacteria that ferments grows out of control. So we all have a few fermenting organisms, but when they grow out of control and colonize and take over, they start producing alcohol. So they take carbohydrates and turn it into ethanol.
Wow.
Yes. Wow.
So how prevalent is this? Is this a rare condition? Is it pretty common? Are we learning more about it?
Well, we think that it's very underdiagnosed. So our nonprofit organization is in touch with and has been in touch with over 1,000 people that think they have it. Many of those people have been diagnosed. Many people are struggling to find a diagnosis. And so that's still pretty rare when you think about it, 1,000 people in the whole world. And we do communicate with people in other countries. But we think it's really underdiagnosed, that a lot of people are walking around with this and they think, gee, I feel dizzy today, or I feel woozy, or I don't know why I feel this way because I haven't been drinking, but I almost feel like I'm drunk. So I think a lot of people have it and they don't even know it.
Well, I think it's fascinating. Remember when kombucha came out? Kombucha is a drink that has, tons of this fermented, stuff in it, and it's supposed to be good for you. When it first came out, and actually I was working at the American College of Gastroenterology at the time, and I would drink it. And I'm not a big drinker at all. I hardly ever drink. And I'm drinking this drink, and I felt like I was a little bit buzzed. At some point, they recalled, this is early on in the kombucha evolution, but they actually had to remake the formula because it was fermenting too much and causing this high alcohol content. So,
wow,
I mean,
I didn't know that about kombucha because it's supposed to be so good for you. And
early on, I think when it first came out, it was like fermenting so much that it had a higher alcohol content than it should have had. But with that said, so what, with all, speaking of kombucha, we're a lot of people are, drinking that. There's all sorts of digestive health drinks that are marketed as probiotics, and people are taking, the candy, for goodness sakes, has probiotics in them and all this stuff. Do you think that's been, affecting people's gut and the gut microbiome and the balance that could be causing this situation?
I absolutely do. I think a lot of factors contribute to gut dysbiosis to begin with, that we've got antibiotics, we've got hormones in our meat, we've got all these factors that are dietary, but then you put supplements on top of that. And so many supplements have not been really tested. A lot of people say they're great, and I'm not doubting that they could be, but we don't really know about a lot of those supplements, and especially fermented foods that are taken as prebiotics or probiotics. It sounds in theory that they would be great for you. Oh, you're going to, add these wonderful microbes to your gut. But like you just demonstrated with the kombucha, that's not always true. We don't really know what all they're doing to our guts. And I think that adds to the dysbiosis, along with a lot of sugar and fat in the Western diet.
Oh, we're just doomed. Oh God.
I know.
It's just, what can we eat at this point? But seriously, I'd like to take our listeners through. You have some really interesting cases in here, or examples of patients. Can you give us a little summary of, a situation where a patient had this, didn't know about it, and what happened to them? Maybe they got pulled over for drunk driving. Like what happened? I think that's the best way to really understand what's going on.
It is. And so many of our patients, that's how they find out they have something wrong with them. Because a lot of us feel like, oh, I ate this big meal and I'm kind of, you have that postprandial slump and you think, I'm going to take a nap. So we don't really pay that much attention always to, how we feel after we eat. We just think, oh, we're tired. But a lot of our patients found out by getting pulled over, saying, oh, you were weaving in and out the traffic, and then they get their blood alcohol tested, either with a breathalyzer, or they get arrested and sent to the hospital to test. And then they come back with these extraordinarily high blood alcohol levels, like in the 300s, 400s, 500s, which translates to 0.4, not 0.04. But if you're blowing 400, if your blood is testing 400, that means you're blowing a 0.4. That's so many times the legal limit of most states are 0.08. So you can imagine how shocking that is to be pulled over. So we have a number of patients, and one in particular that you'll read about in the book is Ray, and he's been very public. He's been, sadly, his story was splashed all over the news, and people can still find that. But he was working and had an accident. And what was so dramatic about it was that he was carrying a load of fish, and the fish spilled on the highway. But he actually lost his job and had to deal with some court issues. And we have a number of patients like that. I could tell dozens of stories, but a lot of times that's how they initially find out that there's even anything wrong with them.
So in the case of Ray, if the fermentation is so great that it actually produces an intoxication, just like if you were drinking alcohol.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Just because the gut is creating the alcohol doesn't mean it doesn't get into your bloodstream and into your brain. So it absolutely does. And you actually are drunk. That is the end result.
That is so scary.
It is terrifying. And I can tell you from a personal experience, my husband had AutoBrewery, which is what led me down this whole path of trying to figure out what it was and how to treat it and all that. And it was terrifying because the first time that I saw him driving that way, now he'd had some episodes around the house, after a big meal, he acted like he was passing out. But, you think, oh, he's just exhausted, and he fell asleep. I didn't realize until he was driving one day, and was speeding and going over the line. And I kept saying, Joe, pull over. You have to stop. And he turned his head like this and looked at me, took his eyes completely off the road, looked at me and said, I'm fine. And I said, you're not fine.
Wow.
You have to pull over. And so thank goodness, he finally pulled over. I made him get out of the car and give me the keys. And I really thought he was having a hypoglycemic episode. I thought, oh my gosh, his blood sugars dropped to 40 and he's having this terrible episode. And so we were on our way to a restaurant. So when I went ahead and drove real quick to the restaurant, we got him some food and he seemed better. And then the next time it happened, I took him to the ER because I thought, this is crazy. And sure enough, his blood alcohol level was 0.334, I think it was.
And you're probably like, what are you doing when I'm not looking? What are you doing in the bathroom? Like, you're probably thinking like,
where are you getting
he's
this
slinging back the
alcohol?
wine. So how, we joke about it right now. It sounds funny, but it's really not. How can the medical community determine, a doctor or blood test determine if it's alcohol from, drinking too much wine or vodka, or something that your body's producing? Like, how do you differentiate?
Okay, so the sad part is there's no way to tell with a breathalyzer or a blood alcohol level. And that's why the police are just doing their job. They stop somebody who have an elevated blood alcohol level. You have to deal with that with the way the law says. But when they go to the doctors actually have a way of testing, and it is a controlled environment. And this is what happened to my husband. They put him in the hospital for 24 hours. He was allowed no visitors. They searched all of his clothes to make sure he didn't have any alcohol. They made sure nobody brought him any alcohol. And he's a nurse also. It was at the hospital.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
So everybody's really interested in this whole thing and trying to figure out what it is. And then they fed him a high carbohydrate meal. They gave him some glucose like you would in a glucose challenge. And he ate, carbohydrate meals for a cup. It took him, past tense, thank goodness. It took him usually almost 24 hours before he would flare on carbohydrates. And so the next day in the hospital, sure enough, his blood alcohol shot up. So everybody got to see it with their own eyes in person. And often that's the only way we can convince someone that this is a real disorder. They have to put them in a controlled environment and see it for themselves. So that is the gold standard test for diagnosing Auto-Brewery Syndrome.
But in order to get the test, you have to be aware that could be happening to you or a loved one. And what are some of the signs for our listeners out there? And again, it is considered a rare condition, but it's not out of the normal that someone that you may know or love could have this, or maybe even yourself. Like, what are some of the signs and symptoms early on that people could be aware of, kind of maybe go, maybe this is what's happening to you?
Exactly. So some of the earliest signs are just like they would be as if you were drunk, but you haven't been drinking. So we have caregivers that call us all the time. Somebody's partner or spouse will call and say, my partner is having these episodes and I don't know what's causing them. And we say, well, have they been drinking? Well, just a little bit. So we say, well, you need to watch them and tell us if they ever have that when they're not drinking, because that is key. If you're having a drink, it's really hard to tease that out. Yes. Is it Auto-Brewery or not? And so we tell people to, if they can abstain from drinking for a while and you see that episode, then you need to be concerned. Yeah. And we have patients all the time. I mean, I worked in ER for a while and we'd have patients all the time come in and say, but I haven't been drinking. And I know they say that to the police a lot too. I haven't been drinking. Well, sometimes they're just wanting to deny it or wanting to get out of trouble. But I think we need to listen to some of those people. If they really are saying, seriously, I don't drink. I'm not a drinker, or I drink so little. I really only drink on the weekends. And here it is, a Wednesday at noon. If they're really adamant about I did not have a drink, but they're acting drunk, I think that's a red flag. And they should probably at least buy a breathalyzer and see. I mean, that's the best way to start. We tell all of our contacts, get a breathalyzer. And that way you'll know if you're feeling woozy, check your blood alcohol. And if you haven't been drinking, well, then you maybe need to see a doctor.
And what kind of doctor? A gastroenterologist? Is that the best one to see? Who should they see? I know you love, because do they even believe that this is a thing?
So many don't. So many have never heard of it. So many doctors still don't believe it or just say, that's not my specialty. I can't help you. So what we say is find an open-minded doctor. And it doesn't matter if they're a nurse practitioner, a DO, an MD, a nurse, a naturopathic doctor, find someone who's open-minded and who says, this is really interesting. I'd like to know more about it. And then we say, yes, you have to have a gastroenterologist to find out what the organisms are. You're probably going to need an EGD and a colonoscopy to kind of figure out what organisms we're dealing with. And you might need an infectious disease doctor, but start off with somebody who's just open-minded, willing to listen and learn.
Oh, this is great advice. Now, what happens once you have the diagnosis? Like in the case of your husband, like what, or other patients that you work with, like what is the course of treatment? Can this be cured, or is it something that they always have to live with?
Okay, so the good news is my husband is cured, and he has not had an episode for 13 years. So I always use him as the hopeful. This is the hope. The other end of the spectrum, we have some patients that have relapsed multiple times, who it feels like it's become chronic, and they have a very, very hard time getting better. Having said that, I think the majority of our patients do very well. Most of them get well. they go on and live lives that don't include a lot of carbohydrates, probably for the better for all of us. Eat low carbohydrate, don't drink alcohol, all those kinds of lifestyle changes. But we have everything in between as well. And as far as the treatment, I tell them the same thing. We have this spectrum. We have the very holistic practitioners over here. We have the very allopathic practitioners over here, meaning conventional medicine, and everything in between. So you choose as a person who has a problem with your health, you choose your path. Do you want to try the holistic method where you just do supplements and diet? Do you want to go right for the medication and go with the, conventional medicine, taking some medication, or do you want to do some of each? And so again, it's a personal preference and a personal choice. We're all in charge of our health and how we choose to treat it. So again, I'll work with anybody. If you want to go holistic, I have lots of information for that. If you want to allopathic, both together, I can help you with that. So I consult with a lot of patients on a regular basis to help them make those decisions.
No, this is great. So both channels, they address the microbiome and what's going on with the bacteria in your gut, trying to rebalance it so there's not an overgrowth. And, it sounds like this could overlap with some other things. Like we just interviewed Dr. Pimental a few episodes back, and he talked about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I know he was one of the first people to actually do a case report on Auto-Brewery Syndrome. Actually, I talked to him, I think it was, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago at an annual meeting. And he had a case report about this exact syndrome with somebody getting pulled over or whatever. And it was Auto-Brewery Syndrome. But there could be a lot of overlap. So I think it might make sense for patients to understand that the treatment is addressing what's going on in your gut microbiome with the good and bad bacteria, because they get out of whack, and things like this could be the end result. Now, are you seeing a link in patients who have this? Maybe they've been on, is there any commonalities, like they've taken lots of antibiotics over their lives, or they're heavy carbohydrate eaters? Is there any commonalities?
Yes, you mentioned the two big ones. Dr. Kanodia and I did a small research study with our group of Auto-Brewery patients, and we compared them to their household members. And the significant factors were just what you said, use of antibiotics, especially long-term use for something like acne. So that was a significant factor. And carbohydrate eaters, sugar, they, had the high carbohydrate diet. Antibiotics. There were a couple of other items that not statistically significant, but interesting that we would want to follow, and things like stress. A lot of our patients say, I don't flare with food, but I flare with stress. And so again, even if a patient chooses the medication route, I always tell them you need to look at your whole lifestyle. It's almost like anything you're dealing with, whether it's irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, any of those things, you want to look at your whole lifestyle. What am I doing that is contributing to my dysbiosis? What do I want to do to fix that? Maybe I need to rearrange my life so I don't have so much stress. I'm not eating, certain foods, those things. So it's a whole lifestyle change.
So Barbara, what other forms of treatment besides taking a medication, or maybe working with natural sources of supplements, what other alternatives are there for patients?
In addition to the supplements, we have some of our more recalcitrant, I'll say, or they're patients that are relapsing and having a really hard time finding a cure, have turned to fecal microbiota transplants. And most of us know that as FMT or fecal transplants. And we just watched a documentary not too long ago about it called Designer Shit. I think you were aware of that.
We did an episode a few episodes back. Check it out. It talks all about it. It's fantastic as well.
And so we've had about 6 patients in our group that have done fecal transplants. Two or three of them did them through a doctor, and the others have done them at home, DIY. And so they've had varying levels of success, but that's the next big thing, I think, to look at these chronic cases that can't seem to get over the Auto-Brewery. Many of them are turning to fecal transplants, and we're hoping to get a clinical trial started soon for that.
Well, that's exciting. And for those patients who want to learn more about the microbiome, check out our recent podcast episode with Saffron Cassidy. She's the producer and star of Designer Shit documentary, which gives a great overview of not only the process that she went through to give herself a fecal microbiota transplant, but also about the microbiome itself. It's very interesting. Again, we're not saying go out and try this yourself. There's a lot of research that goes behind it, a lot of expert insights. So check that episode out and also watch the documentary. It's fascinating. Now, tell us a little bit more about your organization and what sort of resources are available for patients and providers who want to learn more.
Okay, so the big thing we do, education. That's our first and most important mission, is we want to educate. Any time we can talk, we've had a couple of episodes on things like The Good Doctor, ER. I can't even name all of them. We've had some episodes that, get that word out there. AutoBrewery is real. And we'll have people say, oh, I saw you, we heard about AutoBrewery on that one of those shows. So any place we can educate. We're big on educating doctors, nurses, any kind of healthcare provider, any kind of legal lawyers. We'll educate lawyers, judges, police officers. And I give my book away to any provider. If you're a doctor, nurse, in law enforcement, yes, that book, My Gut Makes Alcohol, I will mail that free. I even sign it and send it to you.
Good.
So, I'll send you another one. You can pass that one.
This is great. It's really interesting. I can't wait to finish it.
But I have a lot of patients that will call me and say, my doctor would read. I ask them first, will your doctor read the book? And they say, I think he would or she would. And so I mail them a book. Oh. And so education is big. We want to do continuing education. I was able to co-author a piece of continuing education for providers, and it's with the National Institutes of Health, and it's called Stat Pearls, and it's on Auto-Brewery Syndrome. So we promote that article a lot. I update it every year. I try to get the word out. We're constantly doing CE. We've been on the Dr. Oz show. We've been on BBC. We've been on World's Weirdest Diseases or something.
And now you've been on Gastro Girl.
And now we've been on Gastro Girl.
Yeah.
That's right. So we're getting the word out. We're very excited to just to have people believe us is huge. So education is our biggest push. And then, of course, research. We are interested in research. We promote it. We support it financially. So with some of our donations, I've written some grants and we've supported some small research studies. We're involved in a really big one right now that I'm not really at liberty to talk about, but it's a lot of our patients have enrolled in the study. And I think it's going to be huge once it's published.
Well, you let us know when it's published and we'll have you on again to talk about the findings, which
I'm sure will be. And we'd love to get the researchers on.
So exciting. Absolutely.
Yes, one of the researchers, because it's going to be big, not just for Auto-Brewery, but for everything gut related, and especially things, alcohol use disorder. I mean, I think this is going to kind of change the landscape of what we know about some of those gut microbes.
Well, that's fantastic. I love this area of the body, the microbiome. I think it's fascinating. There's so much power to health and healing, as well as understanding what's coming down the line in terms of targeted treatments when they can identify what you're maybe missing or what you have too much of. I think that's just fascinating. Now, for those who want to check out your resources, where can we find you online?
I have a webpage called autobrewery.info. Nice and easy, autobrewery.info. And I try to keep it updated with the latest references, journal articles, any kind of links to stories that are interesting or interviews, that kind of thing. So we try to keep it up to date. The book is for sale on the webpage, My Gut Makes Alcohol. And so again, autobrewery.info. We want people to visit that and get information and contact us. My email is on the webpage. Anybody can contact me. And I love educating people about Auto-Brewery and gut health and so many other things.
Well, I anticipate this getting a lot of interest on when we post this, especially on YouTube, because there's comments and people will probably have questions there. So we'll definitely let you know when that's posted, so you can check out the comments and maybe weigh in if you want and provide more information about your resources. But this has been just so fascinating. I'm so happy to have you on. Look forward to catching up with you when your research project is complete. Definitely want to learn about the findings. Thank you so much, Barbara, and good luck. And for the patients listening out there, if you're affected by this Auto-Brewery Syndrome, whether your own personal life or maybe you know someone that maybe could possibly have this, know that there is resources and support out there for you. And we look forward to talking with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.